Okay, it's another episode of Rise Up with Marc Mixon. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Mark.
Again, the same intro. I've been starting to threaten that I'm going to start this show differently just to throw Adam off, but I guess it's not going to be this week.
One of these days.
One of these days.
Hopefully we'll get a super fan. They'll cut all these together one day and it'll just be like, hundreds of hello, Adam. Hello, Mark. Hello, Adam. Hello, Mark.
Well, yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah. Put a beat to it.
So how are you this morning, sir? We both got our coffee going on. And,
Yeah, I'm good. Backstage we talked a little bit before. I'm a little tired. I'm shooting a movie this weekend, next weekend, so it was a good first day, and still kind of on a high about that. But
great.
yeah, otherwise I'm just trying to enjoy my Sunday, which this
Excellent.
is the best way to start it. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing a little under the weather today. I'm going to try to avoid mopping the sweat off my brow occasionally as we go through our interview. But doing all right. I'm glad to be here with you. Glad to have our guest on today. Let me do our quick little self promotion. Everyone out there, please like and subscribe. Hit the like button. Share with your friends. We've started getting some engagement from people who are recommending guests, mostly recommending they come on the show, which is okay. If you got a thing and you think you're doing the work that will help us break free of some of the oppressive systems keeping us all down, drop us a line, riseupwmark@gmail.com. And pitch a show idea for us. I'd love to hear the work that you are doing. We're out here trying to platform the organizers and activists that are doing the real work to help us move forward here in this late stage capitalism dystopia we find ourselves in. I'm so glad I don't really read the news anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the news I read, I was just as we were backstage reading. I think I mentioned, was it last week that we had Crystal Marks on? Was it a couple of weeks ago?
I think so. I'd have to look at
yeah.
But I think so, yeah.
But having reading Guy Oron's reporting, Real Change, one of the few news sources. South Seattle Emerald, another news source that I read, and listening to YouTubers basically. That's where I get my news. I just don't pay attention to the political theater that the corporate bosses and billionaire class are all trying to inundate us with. So
yeah, it's a real fun time. I know I skim the news a little bit, but I don't spend a lot of time with it because it just makes me very angry and depressed. So
I knew it was
I am kind of waiting for him to. Yeah, you called it, but I never disagreed. I've been kind of with one eye off looking at it. I've been trying to pay attention to whether or not he cancels the Department of Education, since it's going to have a pretty big effect on my job. Hopefully I won't lose it, but still, the institution I work for, there would be layoffs and changes for sure if he does that.
Yeah, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show, but the college I work for is going under. They are being absorbed by a different university, and it sort of sounds like they're going to be looking for some third party to manage their venues, which is, actively my job is managing their venues. So it sounds like I will be potentially out of a job, and I'm gaming how to deal with that. We'll see. Maybe if they want a third party company to manage their venues, I'm considering maybe starting a venue management company to help them manage their venues. I mean, it seems bizarre. It doesn't seem like the cheapest way to do things. Like, you've already got people that are running your venues. Just hire those people to run the venues. But if you want to throw more money at it so you don't have to deal with it, whatever. It's a time of uncertainty for all of us, honestly.
Yeah, the whole country. But yeah, my sympathies for your situation. I'm hoping for the best, but planning for the worst, and I'm sure you are doing the same.
Yeah, well, hoping to just look at it for opportunity. The sad thing will be that currently I have the free use of spaces, and I've been using that to provide space for my community to do trainings, and I host kit building sessions, and we had Medic Viv on the show last year sometime, and I host trainings for them to host their street medic trainings, as well as some other things, some OPSEC trainings, and that will likely all go by the wayside if I'm no longer managing a bunch of spaces, and that will be sad. I've been so excited that I can do that for my community. I don't have a whole lot of skills or expertise, but space can be hard to come by, and so it's been great that I can do that, and we'll keep doing it for as long as I can, I guess. Enough of this enough of this personal whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's transition to our guest, who I'm really super excited to bring on. Our guest this week is, from my perspective, one of the most dynamic organizers and activists in Seattle. She's been doing this certainly a lot longer than I have, and seems to have her fingers in everything. I do some minor work with her on Sundays, occasionally. I'm not always there, but I'm really excited to talk with her about how she got into this, all the work she's been doing over the years that I've been following her, and find out what's coming next. So let's go ahead and run our transition. When we come back, we'll be talking with Ty Reed, a local organizer and activist here in Seattle.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. Oh, dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof. Oh. Some answers. Some answers. Some answers. Some answers. Some answers.
Okay. Hello, Ty. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, Mark. Hey, Adam. Glad to be here.
I know you've got a lot going on Sundays, because as I mentioned in the intro, I do some of it with you sometimes. But I appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to talk with us this morning. So I'm going to just sort of hop right into it. As I said, why don't you tell our listeners anyway, and tell me, how did you get involved initially in your organizing and activist work?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot because I really like to uplift the work that Transit Writers Union does. When I first started working to be organizing in Seattle, I, like a lot of people, didn't live in Seattle, right? Like I lived in Linwood for a while, working in Everett, and then I lived in Shoreline, working in Seattle, and then I finally, like in 2019, was able to afford to actually live in the city in a 179 square foot micro studio. We love those. And part of, I think, my graduation requirement from University of Bothell was to do some community organizing. So I went to like the MLK Day event back when they had like really good, no shade to them now, really great workshops. And there was a really dynamic one about homelessness from Transit Writers Union. So I talked a lot at that meeting, hooked up with the organizer, and then after that, like within a few months, I was working as a part-time organizer for Transit Writers Union. And then was really gearing up to do Orca for All. I don't know if you heard about it, but it was about to be huge. We were about to fight for, free Orca for everybody, like an Orca card, like which is a transit pass, of course, in Seattle and the King County region. We were going to fight for Orca for All up until the pandemic, when it happened in the shutdowns happened in March and transit was free, people weren't moving. We kind of had a transition away from focusing on transit, right? And I really love that True, as a transit organization, transit writers organization, has always like been led by its members, and like part of the redirection that I wanted to focus on was mutual aid. So I started my first mutual aid group through Transit Writers Union in Ballard, where my micro studio was, with another friend, just because we had a heat wave and there was nobody giving people water, right? And so after that, working with different organizations, like having hooked up with Stop the Sweeps to stop a sweep for 2.5 weeks in downtown 2021. That's why we started community hours in the section that we did, was because in 2021, we stopped a sweep for like 2.5 weeks. And we were able to actually like put the cops off for a really long time. And we built relationships there. So Caitlin and I, after that, like 6 months after that, we started community hours so that we could stay connected. And we still see some people from that sweep down there. So I've kind of just started kind of randomly. I think the pandemic, like a lot of people, was an opening for me to, one, get involved in mutual aid because I was working from home. And then two, I kind of had also gotten involved in the protest space, but didn't like that a lot. So I kind of moved more into mutual aid. So I've just kind of been bopping around, doing that kind of work since. And during that time, helped started Hauser Neighbors, was working at Real Change for a couple of years, just like kind of building a community since the pandemic. I think there's a lot of things that have been really bad. Obviously, we've lost over 1 million people. People are disabled, but I think for what it did for political organizing was really powerful, at least from what I've seen in Seattle.
That's excuse me, that's great context. And I agree. It was just before the pandemic I started stepping up and doing some political organizing and doing my first outreach. I was living in Bellingham at the time, for the unhoused people who lived out behind my shop up there.
Mhm.
And I had lived in Burien previously, and then moved up there for a job that was not good and did not work out before I came back to Seattle. So because I think I started following you, and I had seen Stop the Sweeps just on Twitter from a guy that I followed who I don't know personally.
Who does? Whoever does.
But I came across you during your city council run. So can you talk? And that's when I started following you on Twitter. Can you talk about your city council run? What motivated that? What that experience was like for you?
Motivation, temporary insanity. Okay, so that was in 2023. I think I never regret my experiences, just because I think I got a lot of information, and I worked with some really cool people, like two people. uh, I was motivated after basically 3 or 4 years of watching, maybe just since Bruce Harrell, right? I don't really feel that compelled to run for office, but since Bruce Harrell's been in office, we have started to lose our friends, right? When I first started doing outreach, it was under the Jenny Durkan administration. Many criticisms of Madam Durkan, but she wasn't sweeping. She was kind of lazy. She wasn't doing anything, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. And so when I first started doing distro and outreach and talking to folks outside, people were kind of stable. People were able to build up like encampments that lasted a really long time and that were kind of semi-permanent. Bruce Harrell destroyed all of that, right? We lost every permanent, semi-permanent encampment that we had. When I first started outreach, it used to be to the same camp all the time. And now Ballard is kind of the hell zone, and they've officially made it impossible to set up camp where they're just sweeping every 2 to 3 days. And that is 100% because of Bruce Harrell and the people that he's put in office and the money that he's spent. So after watching that switch, right? Like that's really what politicized me, right? I was kind of doing distro and a somewhat of a just routine, right? We don't always do the work we do based in the principles we want it to be eventually, right? I hadn't really read mutual aid and gotten to that from Deed Spade, but after seeing that dramatic switch to see how this one executive position, this one political position was able to fundamentally change how we do sweeps, increasing them over 200% from one year to the next, I was really motivated to make the race about sweeps. And I think people want to make the race about homelessness. I mean, that's what Nicole's campaign was in 2021. When I was the campaign manager for Nicole Thomas Kennedy for city attorney, it was always about homelessness. It was about somehow there's this group of people that are causing problems, not about the mechanism of sweeps and what it takes to maintain that, right? It isn't just paying for cops and paying for some cleanup crews, right? It is paying for digging equipment, paying for contractors, paying to rent Herc vehicles, right? Paying for the Unified Care Team. There's like $40 million or more, right, that goes into this. And I think that I wanted to make my race about what was happening to people on the street from a perspective of somebody who wasn't trying to sweep them away or speak on behalf of them, right? So I kind of wanted to make it started out as this campaign about we need to talk about sweeps. We need to be talking about what we are doing to folks living outside and how we're exacerbating the situation. But my platform in general was the solidarity budget, right? I talked to Angelica Chavarro before I ran, one of the architects and supporters of Solidarity Budget. And one of the things that was really important to me was like not running on my own ideas, running as if I have some sort of access to elite knowledge, but running on the idea that we've all done this work. There are already people who have designed an entire different version of Aurora where we don't have to have all this high traffic, where there are bridges for pedestrians and like all these beautiful visions. We've seen it for the waterfront. We've seen it for everything that people like Transit Writers Union, people from the Urbanists, people from, Seattle DSA, they can actually put in the work to create plans to actually solve some of our problems. And we never run on that. We always run on hero politician who's going to save us. And I really wanted to run on the work of community members I really respected. So that's kind of what motivated me to run for office. I had like a really good time doing it to some degree, but I hate walking. You do, Mark, of having the bad knees, but yeah, it's a physical job for sure.
It is. I did some campaign management for a congressional run this last cycle, and canvassing with the volunteers. Just boy, a day of trudging through the snow in Bellingham or Mount Vernon, knocking on doors, just was was killing me. So you did campaign management before you said a lot of things there, and I want to come back and tie into them. Talk to me for just a hot second about your campaign management experience.
Yeah, didn't you not interview Nicole Thomas Kennedy? Why do I have this memory that you did? Did I make that up?
I have not, but I should.
I hope she would say no. She needs to rest. But yes, that actually, funnily enough, I didn't really get into Twitter until probably 2020, when people on Facebook just became really insufferable. So shockingly, I thought Twitter would be better. So through tweeting, I hooked up with the consultant for Nicole Thomas Kennedy, Prism Consulting, and he had seen some of the things I talked about and wanted me to support her campaign. And so I was like, fuck yeah, I would love to help. I've never done anything like that before, but I could pretty much do anything. I'm going to be honest. And I would love to support an abolitionist running for office. And that campaign became insane. I was just thinking about the other day. People are always asking me, like, what are your lessons learned from that campaign? And lesson is, don't trust the Democrats, right? I speak for myself. This is my own opinion. I don't want to misconstrue how other people on the campaign might feel, but we watched Democrats, be really pissed that it came down to an abolitionist versus a Republican. They really wanted it to be an easier choice, right? An extremist like Ninty K as an abolitionist, right? Or somebody like Pete Holmes, who was the existing city attorney. And it kind of just reminds me of the Biden situation, where I know people resent NTK for running so far to the left because we got someone like not Sarah Nelson, well, she's awful too, but because we got Ann Davison instead. And I think rather than critiquing the democratic system that like runs Seattle politics, right, that has a really big say and who's running for office, and rather than critiquing how conservative that group of people has gotten, it was the left needed to come to the center a little bit when we had an opportunity to actually make a decisive choice. We didn't have to make a middling choice and choose Pete Holmes again. We could have said, let's go with an abolitionist. So that campaign was also a lot of good experience about, in general, how campaigns work. That I learned a lot about the Democracy Voucher Program, which I think is really dope in Seattle. Really helpful for my campaign when I ran, being able to get free money basically by running democracy vouchers. But yeah, it was a good experience. But the Democratic establishment, on a national scale, is pretty horrific. But locally too is also kind of at the heart of why we have the politicians that we have, right? Like, people get into office because of the LDs that support them, right?
Right. I talk on the show a lot how Democrats are, and a huge part of the problem. They are not. They are a corrupt party that is really. They don't represent the people. They're not an opposition party. They represent business interests, and it's so clear here in Seattle, where sure we've got Republicans, but essentially everyone in office identifies as a Democrat, yet they're all so fucking conservative that they're always willing to hurt the community and protect the money interests. And it just makes it like, if I lived in a red district, if I lived in a red area of the country, then maybe I could fool myself to believe that Democrats were somehow progressive. But living in Seattle and seeing how the horror the Democrats bestow upon us all, like I that whole, the left needs to move center. Fuck that. Like, Democrats, you need to move left. You need to actually represent people over profit for once. That is, I can't with that.
More like move out of the way, dude. When I say the LDs, I remember distinctly when Bruce Harrell was running for office, and I forget which LD it was, so I'm not going to make it up, but I remember them double endorsing him and Lorena Gonzalez and being like, whoever wins, we have two strong Democrats. Fast forward 3 years, Bruce Harrell is saying that the president has great people doing great work, or whatever he said the other day. Like, many criticisms of Lorena Gonzalez, but and she also ran a crappy campaign that didn't distinguish herself from him enough because everybody's afraid to be the far left candidate. And so instead we get Bruce Harrell because he's charismatic.
Yeah, fuck that. And that asshole just, my partner works for the Fifth Avenue Theater, and I remember he wanted to come to the Fifth Avenue Theater and he wanted to like show off for whatever the fucking show was, just show off. And so he had specific sweeps done along Fifth Avenue just to clear all the homeless people out so that he and his friends wouldn't have to see anyone on their way to the theater. It was just, that guy. And I'm so incensed that we will spend tens of millions of dollars to assault and terrorize and murder our most vulnerable citizens, rather than providing places for them to sleep, providing street showers, providing food, providing tiny house villages. Like, the service is not sweeps paradigm, right? We could use this money instead of paying 6-figure salaries for thug cops. We could actually spend this money to help people. And we just, We just refuse. Seattle
The,
is
the
not.
money the money piece, Mark, is where I get fucked up, right? Because if you follow Divest SPD on Twitter or you're just paying attention, two cops together, like we were talking about how Nicholsville lost their third village.
Mhm.
They had budgeted. And the reason, like, and one of the article that did mention that the thing that the article didn't mention was Nicholsville had put together a budget that, despite only being budgeted for two villages, they were able to make a third because of how cheap it is to run something self-managed. What did it say? According to the IRS, $300,000 to run
Yeah.
Nicholsville for 1 year. And that's two self-managed villages that have a really good reputation, are respected in the community. And that's nothing. That's like less than two cop salaries. Because we pay
Right.
high enough paid cop going to sweep. That's so many, like $38 million, what we spend 1 year on sweeps. How many Nicholsvilles could we have? And we could have all kinds of versions that have meet different needs, and there's just no energy there, right? We would rather pay 1.5 million or whatever it's going to cost to get rid of that what is it, that fountain down in Westlake, than to house people. Aren't there tiny house villages sitting in Georgetown that they're saying they can't get out because they've built them and they're but you need the city to allow you to permit them? Like the neoliberalism that runs the city is insane, because there's always a contractor who makes money off of that. There's always somebody making money, but if the service doesn't always end up with the people, then conservatives rightfully get mad, right? That's where I always come off as the most like right wing, is when I'm like, the government is wasting our tax dollars, right? That's something that liberals can never say, right? If your job as a reformist is to never critique the government, then you're not willing to say that hard thing, which is actually, I agree, we are throwing away millions of dollars on homeless services, right? Some of them are good, but some of them are trash. Some of them are funneling money to people who make $200,000 as an executive, right? So that you can abuse people in your shelter, so that you can have bed bugs in your shelter, so that you can pay case managers slave wages so that they can abuse people in your shelters, right? So yeah, the money thing just drives me crazy, because I think that's not where people think of fascism. They think they're like, oh, it's about targeting certain populations. It's like, it's about targeting easily exploited populations where you want to extract their value. And that can be trans people, that can be Black people, that can be immigrants, that can be unhoused people. But it is about an economic process. And the process is getting everybody paid and never solving the problem. And it's so stark in Seattle. Like, the reputation we get for being some sort of progressive hub drives me insane.
Yes, I have complained about it frequently, because we are just not. We're like a haven for billionaires. We're not.
Oh.
we're not a progressive city at all. And we got what, 1,700, 1,800 cops, all making between $150,000 and $250,000 a year. Like, we could build tiny villages that house essentially the entirety of our unhoused population by cutting the cops in half. It would not. We'd still have fucking cops. We just wouldn't have homelessness anymore. It would be. So talk to me about the solidarity budget. Just in general, is that still happening?
Another thing that kind of just disappeared, it kind of got eaten up in this kind of Seattle performative space, right? It's like people don't even talk about it anymore, but the solidarity budget is genius, right? It's exactly what we needed. Post George Floyd uprisings, was this idea that community could control some amount of the money that we have access to. And the Black Brilliance Project behind it and the other organizations who put it together took months to get feedback from people, to establish it in the first place. And then they still do the survey every year to determine where we want the money to go. But the hard part is, if council doesn't appropriate that money, then it's all talk. Right? We can have this, it's pages and pages of everything we need to put money into, things you haven't even thought of, really deep ways to affect childcare to make it cheaper, right? Childcare is like $2,000 a month in Seattle. And so I think that what's a tragedy about solidarity budget is how much work went into it and the way that it wasn't able to be sustained, right? It takes a lot of energy to get the city to do anything about the budget. Budget season becomes Lord of the Flies, right? I hate to say it, but people immediately start working on their own concerns, right? Organizations that are relying on money are working on their own things. Political organizations are lobbying politicians, right? So the solidarity budget outlines the use of our entire fucking general fund and what it should be going to instead of things like the police, right? Things that are actually going to solve homelessness. Tiny house villages, like the model used in Nicholsville and Share, and for like 10 cities, that's included in there. Ending sweeps and redirecting those funds towards things like trash pickup, right? I think it's so frustrating the way that people will talk about, some people will talk about the left as if we don't care about the obvious problems of people existing outside. And one of the top things we'd love to see the city actually follow through on is sanitation, opening up public bathrooms. That's on the list. Seattle doesn't have one single functioning 24-hour bathroom. It might have it on paper, but we know for a fact that those bathrooms often don't work, or they're locked up. And so this solidarity budget, which I do encourage people to Google, it'll come right up. Seattle solidarity budget really lays out what we could be spending our money on instead, with a very thoughtful vision, with a focus on land back and reparations in a way, and an end of our incarceration system and an end of punishing people through sweeps. And it just didn't get the energy it needed to be able to be sustained, right? People in Seattle did not fight for it the way we should have.
It is enormously frustrating because I agree just so much. I'd say 100%, but it feels like it's got to be more. Of course we want sanitation. Like everyone wants to have a clean, beautiful city. My office is on Seattle Center, and guess Seattle Center is lovely. It's not got trash everywhere, but what it does have is like fucking garbage cans every 15 or 20 feet. And it's got people who empty the garbage. And it's got like, I used to joke, and I don't so much anymore because it just feels so depressing. But I used to joke like, hey, remember in the 90s when everyone was so concerned about people doing drugs in public restrooms? So we got rid of all the public restrooms, and now no one does drugs. It's just
problem
like,
solved.
Problem fucking solved. Like, yeah, like it is part of the extraction of wealth from the public spaces, right? Like, could we provide garbage cans? Could we provide people to empty those garbage cans? Yes, but that would then require public dollars be spent on the public good instead of privatizing all the trash pickup and just removing all public garbage cans so that people have to pay for it. Could we have public restrooms and people to clean them? Of course we could, if we want to spend public dollars on the public good instead of fucking making sure that all of our public money goes to the billionaire class.
I have to say that reminds me of I went to Mexico last July for the first time in my life, and everywhere I went, yeah, I know I kind of want to move there. Everywhere I went, Adam. I know, but everywhere
we're a problem down there.
Yeah, right. Well, thankfully I have a Mexican girlfriend, but she can kind of take me around. But I was so surprised. Like pleasantly surprised. I mean, I don't think I really had an expectation, but I really don't think I did. But just the fact that it was more than I could have ever imagined, that everywhere you went, there was a public bathroom. They were clean. Everything was so taken care of, right? And then we were walking around in Mexico City, and and granted, I'm sure some of the places I went to were the better versions of like how bad it could get, because every city has its bad areas, but there's just no trash on the ground, right? The trash cans that you find were not overflowing. You can just see when a society is putting its money and its resources in something, what benefit you get out of that. And then you come back here, and it doesn't matter where you go. We're just not prioritizing those needs here. And so there's a stark difference.
I loved Mexico City. Shout out to Mexico City. I definitely want to go back. And Mexico City has like 200,000 more people than New York, right? It's the biggest city in North America.
Oh, it has more than that. That is 23 million people there. Yeah.
Oh, in Mexico City?
Yeah.
Either way, it's humongous. It's super busy. Their transit, it's kind of comparable. I really do like New York City transit as well. I'm sure it's got its issues. The difference in Mexico City is, what did you see when you're there? All of these workers all day at all hours walking around with their backpacks and cleaning up. And what me and my girlfriend noticed, I can't speak to the working conditions, right? I'm totally ignorant. But what
Right.
was really stark is something that I don't see on the streets of the United States. One, we don't have a good street culture, so we don't see anything. But
Mm-mm.
two, so many people, obvious coworkers, like wearing the same uniform, walking together to lunch. Right, this idea that seemed casual. You would see them at the taco stand all wearing similar outfits, and they're just like casually with their coworkers in a way that I feel like isn't normalized, at least not in like, I've never seen anything like that in the United States, right? Where it was so
Mm.
obviously taking a break in the middle of the day with your coworkers to get food on the street really quickly and then going back to work for so many reasons. You have to go into a restaurant, you've got to have a pickup app. Like it's like such a hassle to do something like that. And we just haven't invested in it, right? Like we could
Mhm.
have people being paid a good wage to just clean up the streets all day. Someone's going to do it. Plenty of people want to do it. You give me enough money, I would love to do something active like that. Like it's underpaid, and then we shouldn't have to do it. It should just magically be clean, and poor people shouldn't exist, trash shouldn't exist. It's just going to clean up itself. Like that's kind of the mentality that's so frustrating. Isn't that this problem exists? Like I just think about all the trash that I accumulate in my own home. I don't know how often you guys take out the trash, but it's like every 2 or 3 days. I have a cat, so I have like litter bags. Like I have all
Oh,
this stuff, and it's like I literally only don't make an impact because I can pay the garbage people to take it away every single day. If you do not have some garbage person that is paid to take your trash away, it becomes very obvious how much extra stuff you have, right? How much
Mhm.
debris we all bring into our lives, especially as consumers in this country. And so it just like as soon as you leave the United States, even in some of the countries that are horrible, right? Canada's a mess. They've got certain things figured out, right? We're doing things particularly bad, and the people that we blame never comes back to people in power, never comes back to the people who allocate our dollars, who pay our federal workers. It's always somehow homeless people, the most vulnerable people
right.
in the fucking country. You might as well
Yep.
say, yeah, like the most vulnerable class of people in the entire country, right above children, because they have even fewer rights, is the one causing all of the problems in society. Doesn't that feel very suspicious? I guess not to everybody, but that should feel suspicious. Who we're blaming for such massive amounts of problems, you turn around and it's some person who doesn't have a home.
Right. Yeah, no, and it's to me, so clearly the corporate class that is
Mm,
just extracting the wealth for their own personal. We have private opulence and public squalor, and they
mm,
want to continue to extract from the public square for their own fucking benefit. And with more and more apartment complexes that are like walled communities with their own little park inside the center of the block, but we have no fucking third spaces anymore, right? We
Yeah.
don't have places where people can just go and exist out in public. And because how can you do that? We make sure the trash piles up out there. We make sure that there's no place to fucking go to the bathroom. It is, I find it outrageous, which is one of the things that made me want to try to run for office. I've not done so, and I do interview a lot of candidates on this show because I
mhm,
want the people, like I in the activist circles that I travel in, I there's this big, and maybe not so much in real life, but online, there's this huge debate about uh, uh, is the path to change direct action or is it electoralism, right? And it's obviously got to be both. Well,
mm,
we have to build power and community through our direct action in our works, and that's why I have been trying to be more and more of an organizer, because building those relationships is how we build the power that we need together.
mm,
But once we've got it, we need to have people in office that will enact policy. Like the policy and real organizations are the only way to conserve whatever power we generate. Um, and I'm going to use that to transition for a second. So you were one of the people who founded How's Our Neighbors, correct?
yes, I was. I was wondering where you're going with that, so I was like, okay. But yes, how's our neighbors? Indeed.
um, so yeah, so this is a real organization, and it's been doing fucking great work. Well, because it's so weird to me. So many of the, I want to say anarchist or groups maybe that do
Mhm,
the mutual aid work. Um, but they're not real organizations. And there's this whole OPSEC anonymity that happens that keeps people from forming real organizations, which keeps things funded low and keeps us from preserving whatever power we develop. And I'd like to say that one of the things organizers do is form organizations, because that's how you preserve the power you've generated in a community. And there's problems with that, sure. Like when you form an organization, it will immediately begin to have its own interests that might differ from what your interests as an organizer are. But there's just, if you want to get things done, especially and have them preserved in society, I don't see another option. And House Our Neighbors has been enormously successful. Had to go through a couple of initiatives. First to get the social housing development and then to get the funding for it.
26 points, baby.
So yeah, talk to me a little bit about House Our Neighbors, about that process of stepping up to try to form something that will help us turn the tide in this incredibly expensive city.
I will first like to say thank you, Bruce Harrell, for being the face of the No campaign and making everybody vote for us. I don't think we could have done it without you, you stupid fucking asshole. I am really proud of the work that House Our Neighbors has done, but I will say there's a certain point where I'm only a board member. I'm just like a board member for the C3 side, but also on the steering committee, and that's more important because I go to those meetings. So House Our Neighbors was kind of started at, and you know what? I want to go on this whole rant about Transit Riders Union, but I'm not going to. It started as like the No campaign, right? About Compassion Seattle. People like Bruce Harrell, people who are now in Bruce Harrell's office before he was there, really wanting to fundamentally enshrine sweeps into the city policy. And I will say House Our Neighbors is a really good example of how we defeated Compassion Seattle. Bruce Harrell just did the sweeps anyways. And that was something that if people paid attention during our campaign, the No campaign on Charter Amendment 29, we said that like none of this is stopping them from doing it once they're in office. And Bruce Harrell immediately did it. All the bad things. Remember how it was, we're going to have 1,000 units of shelter in a year. He hasn't put up any shelter. Shelters are closing, right? In Seattle, Navigation Center's closing, Orion Center's closing, one of the biggest places, best places for young people to go. That's his legacy, right? But one of the things we said when we were running the No campaign is that we wanted to say yes, right? We wanted to have a yes thing to say, to actually support for something. And that's how I-135 came, which created the developer, like you said. And then we, of course, had to fund it through what was 137 turned into Prop 1A after the city council fucked us and put the alternative. They're really bad, poorly written, potentially illegal an alternative onto the ballot. And I will say one of the things about the different interests in House Our Neighbors, and I really respect this for Tiffany, right? Tiffany McCoy met me also kind of through Twitter. And she reached out because she wanted to stop Compassion Seattle. When I first hooked up with her and we started talking about who we wanted to bring into this fight, she was part of Real Change at that time. So Real Change had these deeper connections to nonprofits, right? Like Real Change has existed for 30 years. They had some of the connections to the people who helped write Compassion Seattle. I immediately said, I don't want to work with those nonprofits, right? If they thought they were helping these billionaires by writing a better version of it, right? That was kind of their excuse. Different organizations, I don't want to name them, but ended up helping to improve the legislation, and it was still really bad. The reason why House Our Neighbors is so strong is because it was built truly grassroots. The people that we brought in, the people that we continue to bring in are really highly vetted. And I'm very vocal about who should be in there. And I really love that, like, even though House Our Neighbors is now its own organization, it's no longer a project under Real Change. And Tiffany is like the policy director. She really respects that. And she is led by the steering committee, right? By the Black and Brown mutual aid, survivalist activist organizers who are like those. That's who makes up the steering committee. And I think that's why it's been able to be so strong, right? Like one of the things, we have a retreat coming up, so we'll talk about this again. again, but one of the questions that always comes up every year, now that we've existed for 4 years, which is just insane to me, is should we do candidate endorsements? I always stand against candidate endorsements because I think it weakens your message and it makes you have to align with a person who's not perfect, which is why we do questionnaires. So we ask certain questions, we post them to the website, and then you can see people's perspective, right? We make the point of having an initiative campaign is that if you have it during a candidate race, you can pull people to the left by having this piece of thing that they have to comment on, right? Ever since social housing won, you have to support social housing, right? As a progressive, you don't get to say this isn't something you support wholeheartedly. House Our Neighbors has like proven that you can do this definitively. 14-point margin the first time, 26-point margin the second time. You don't get to stand against us without looking like a loser. And so we've kind of made this space where it's like you can do things like initiatives, right? And not just in places like Tequila and Renton where they're also doing dope initiatives. You can do it in a competitive place that's really hard to run in, right? Where you get $600,000, $400,000 oppositional campaigns. So House Our Neighbors, I think, is strong because it's, for one, still connected to the organizing class that started it, right? For some of the first people I wanted to bring in were people doing mutual aid, people who I knew going to protest, people that are part of the solidarity budget. And we've slowly brought in like trustworthy nonprofits. People have proven that they're allowing us to lead. People who can, like even the DSA, who I think sometimes people have problems organizing with, have really shown up in a great way for House Our Neighbors, right? We've got a lot of controversial people, right? House Our Neighbors works closely with Lehigh. I personally fucking hate Lehigh. That's not the prerogative of House Our Neighbors, right? It is about specific legislation, a specific agenda, and that doesn't really come into play with the work that we do, right? It's strong because we fight really hard to make sure that like Seattle infighting about who we work with and who we don't work with doesn't affect producing, high quality initiatives that are supposed to be changing people's lives.
Yeah, it's talk to me for a hot, like this is going to be a little bit of a side, but talk to me about Lehigh, right? Like this is the low income housing institute for people who are not in Seattle, and it has struck me as one of those nonprofits that is extracting the dollars that should be helping our neighbors and instead is paying salaries.
Yeah, I think, you know what, Lehigh's thing, they'll tell you that have a monopoly on tiny house villages because no one else can do it. And it's like, well, you also kind of got created by like Frank Chop and were supported politically by this really popular representative in a way that other organizations weren't. So you have like a lot of political clout. I think a lot of people's relationship to Lehigh kind of fractured with the whole Nicholsville lockdown, kicking people out of Nicholsville kind of thing. I personally have a problem with like you said, it is somewhat extractive, right? You look at their budget's like $10 million, right? And it's also really freaking harmful, right? Like it is, you hear about what happens at their tiny house villages, inside of their apartment buildings, all of the places that Lehigh touches, and they're not special, right? I think they get a bad rep because of the Nicholsville thing, and also kind of like the political connections. I think, Sharon Lee is a very controversial person, so people like to talk about her, but they're not really special. So I don't even want to identify them as like being some sort of unicorn. They all these organizations, DESC, CCS, Catholic Community Services, Downtown Emergency Service Center, they all take government money and turn it into abuse and trauma for people, and then just wash and repeat through the system. So Lehigh isn't super special in that, but the way that I think they have, I don't know, bastardized the tiny house village model is, I think, harmful to tiny house villages, right? People look at them in the way that Lehigh runs them. They're not self-managed. It is kind of like tiny tombs, as I've heard of our friends in San Francisco at Poor Magazine call them. They're run differently than something like Nicholsville, right? Like obviously, no organization has its every organization has its issues, but Lehigh, there's always rumors of people selling drugs, people not knowing how to do how to reverse overdoses, not being trained on CPR. The places just kind of run very scarily for the residents. There's always kind of these critiques that come out of Lehigh. but they're really good internally at resolving some of these issues, right? They're really good at allegedly, of course, this is on my opinion, all conjecture, paying people off to be able to not really hear about these stories. There's so many stories in the news, and I feel like they used to happen more often before the stranger got taken over, about the things that were happening at Lehigh, about the official complaints that were being made, about the cases that they were settling. And we just don't hear about that anymore, right? They've just kind of gotten to disappear into this billion-dollar industry in King County. I mean, if you want to make money, just become a nonprofit grifter. Like, we've seen organizations pop up. The More We Love by Christine Moreland down in Burien, that guy who took advantage of people and was selling drugs to folks at Bitter Lake when there was that encampment. The city will literally hand a contract to anybody who has a C3 and says they will sweep people and says they will remove people. So the standards have gotten lower.
Yeah, that fucking that private, The More We Love, that private sweeping company fucking in Burien just drives me insane. My more radical self wanted to be like, these people are not cops. They don't have like arm up. You guys can defend yourself. I just like it is so yeah. Like I'm gonna pivot. Well, let's talk because you mentioned it. And Nicholsville, I love Nicholsville. I love this whole model that the campers, they run they run the villages, right? Like this is their villages. They set the rules. It's sort of this, I don't want to say radical democracy, but it's not a top down decision of how this happens. The people who live there are the ones who make the decisions. They run the security. I'd love to have someone from Nicholsville on the show, actually. But can you talk a little bit about how Nicholsville seems to differ from some of the other tiny house villages? Tent City also seems to be a better. I'm not as familiar with Tent City 3. But
run by Sharewheel.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of these organizations, can you?
Yeah, so I have some familiarity with both. You've seen the 1063 people. They come down to downtown community hours all the time. They've been super helpful. Caitlin and I were literally just there yesterday talking to them because they're being hosted by UW again. Though the model for self-management is something I will live and die by. I know the disadvantages will always be that you're working with highly traumatized people who are struggling, which I would say is a lot of people who don't have the skills to immediately become self-managed. But that's the point of the organization, right? To have that organizational structure so that you could be teaching people how to be political, how to create your own kind of village, right? Like that's the model that I support. And I think that like what makes them different is the money element, right? When you're self-managed, you don't have to pay for everything, right? And I think that's what ends up making everything cost so much, right? Like when I worked as a case manager, my first job out of college, and I hated it so bad, but I was a housing case manager. I got paid, the grant paying for my job was $150,000 to 12 different organizations, right? My half of that, $75,000, was for clients for the whole year. So it got renewed every year. And then 75 was for labor. But my labor was about $50K, $25,000 operation costs to pay for my boss, for the people who don't do direct service work. This is where nonprofits become inherently unsustainable, because the more people you have that aren't doing a function of the grant work, the more you need to have people who are doing their grant work paid less so that you can pay yourself, right? I'm the pencil pusher. I'll never get my money covered by the grant. But the person doing direct service will. And so when you don't have to pay for someone to do direct service, you can run an organization like Nicholsville on $300,000. I don't think people understand how insane that is, that they are running 2 tiny house villages on $300,000. And they actually have a case manager too, someone who's trying to help villagers get into housing. And so the model, I think, is really important, not just for the money aspect, because I also think we should spend any amount of money it takes to get people inside and taken care of, but also for the empowerment part. we are not like a lot of the criticisms of places like Lehigh and other places where they're working on metrics and turning people over. When you don't have to worry about turning people, exiting people through the program, as they'll call it, so that you can say, you know, you've had some sort of successful resolution. No organization wants to say they've kept the same clients for a whole year. Right. And that's kind of like the problem. You got to kick people out to bring more people in to justify your existence. Well, when your whole existence is, oh, people can live here for years. There is no point about Nicholsville where you got to get them out because we're on some sort of homeless shelter. No, it's like supposed to be not a long-term solution because people do, you know, want to eventually move into housing. But it's meant to be a community. You're meant to know your neighbors. All these other places, they emphasize, and I've heard so much from my friends outside, that they don't want us hanging out. They tell us this isn't our home. They tell us this is temporary. They tell us that, you know, we need to just be keeping our heads down and doing what we need to do. Whereas like the Nicholsville model, the share wheel model, where you have an investment, where there's a reason for you to come there, where you have ownership and accountability over how things run, that's humanizing. Right. That is giving people some amount of dignity and direction so that they can keep, if you can speak truth to power and assert yourself while you're living outside or living, you know, precariously, you can do that when you're more stable. And I think that's like the important part, is that it's like there's some training and some organization that goes into it where it isn't like just a shelter where you might not get any guidance or know why you're there or what the state of the world is. Right. At Nicholsville, they talk about who's in office. They have forums for people who are running for office. They talk about the news. They have weekly meetings about what's going on. They speak in public, at public comment at city council, right? Like you have a group of people who are actually engaged in understanding the solution. I mean, the problems and why they exist. Not just that like homelessness came out of nowhere, but also being able to be part of the solution. I think that's more powerful than the money element, but also you can see how when you have something like Nicholsville, you don't need to spend $10 million to run, you know, one organization.
Right. And on that 300,000, like dozens of people are housed, right? Like it is a very successful, I've always been excited by and impressed by the Nicholsville since I first came across them. Like I don't, when I was still living in Burien, and like when I was busing home, there was on one of my routes, there was a Nicholsville down in Soto, I think, that having a whole bunch of people get off, I was like, wow, that's really cool. That was my first sort of interaction with it. A few weeks ago, we had a Jason, who's I think the current, I'd have to look it up to make sure I get this right, but I think he's the current treasurer of Real Change. On the show, talked about Real Change. Or sorry, Transit Riders Union. We had Crystal.
I was like, what? Change. But yes, yep. Jason, Jay Austin, yeah,
Jay Austin. We had him from Transit Riders Union, and you know, I was just so impressed with. I am so impressed with all the work the Transit Riders Union is doing. It feels like the organization in Seattle that's doing the real on the ground organizing work and is member driven, rider driven. So talk to me, and I know I see Caitlin wearing the true hat often at community hours.
She's always wearing my beanies.
Talk to me about Transit Riders Union and your relationship with them.
I am always the biggest advocate of Transit Riders Union. One, because I consider them my introduction to politics in Seattle, right? I don't go to the membership meetings except for the endorsement meeting to make sure we don't endorse shitty people. But I really respect that, right? I watched Katie Wilson lead that organization working poverty wages because it's important to us that we like are member led, right? We've always had this goal of being able to pay for people's wages just through membership dues, right? To be separate, to be able to endorse whoever we want, do whatever political organization we want, to be able to, you know, pay for lawsuits. I think True doesn't get enough credit for being the group that sued for Compassion Seattle, right? That was not House Our Neighbors. House Our Neighbors was very nascent at that point. We didn't have any money. House of Neighbors was thinking about doing it, but we couldn't. Organizations like True have a relationship with an existing fantastic lawyer who's done a bunch of stuff for them, is able to fundraise and, scrappily put stuff like that together. And they're part of the reason, along with some other organizations, for why Compassion Seattle didn't even make it to the ballot. I also think they've done tremendous work with in Tukwila, right? And one of the things that I really respect about True, that I saw in person during the pandemic, was a reorganization, right? We had a meeting, a power analysis meeting, and this was when I was still kind of in the organizer space. I obviously stopped working as that because, pandemic changed what we were working on. But we had a meeting, a power analysis meeting, about what do we work on? What does it make sense to work on now that transit might not be the avenue? How do we still work for transit riders' issues in Seattle, King County? And without sacrificing our mission. And that's how they ended up working and doing all the stuff in King County, South King County, right? It was like a reorientation of what we should be working on, right? Transit Riders Union was huge, was a big part of passing those suite of tenant protections here, like in King County and Seattle and a few other places that they're fucking overturning, but really part of that work, because after the pandemic, being able to come to terms with the way you've been organizing and talking about how you can pivot, that was super important. I was just talking to Caitlin about how adaptability is so hard. And I think not just leftist spaces, but organizing spaces. People want to keep trying the same thing that has worked, even if, situation has drastically changed, which it did post-COVID, during the beginnings of COVID. And so I really respect that True was able to do that super successfully, right? They won like 80% for the minimum wage in Tukwila, one of the highest, at the time, the highest minimum wage in the country, then set off DSA to help to do that in Renton. Like, really amazing work, all from a super small grass-led organization. So I recommend that people do support True, even if it's just monetarily. I'm not someone who just says throw your money at an org. Please throw your money at Transit Riders Union, right? Like, Transit Riders Union, I was doing a $50 a month donation until I quit my job because I think it's just like really important to take care of those people when they are the people who are going to do the radical work. And it's also membership led, right? I think that we've all seen Katie Wilson's articles, and maybe she doesn't come across as the most progressive person, but True also is membership led. So I've seen, people in leadership there humbly have their ideas not supported, or candidates that they might want in office not supported, because we do what the membership wants, right? We can have robust discussions. I love a good debate at a Transit Riders Union meeting. And we always come out respectfully, moving as one unit, as an organization. So nothing but good things to say about True, right? And that's kind of how my mutual aid group started in Ballard. That's how Caitlin and I started. And then we used that experience to develop the downtown community hours. And so getting that support from Transit Riders Union in the very beginning was like very formative and helpful for us.
That's great. I think we've got Katie scheduled to come on the show in early April, I think is when I've been talking with her about that. And yeah, it's an interesting, I think, dichotomy, because she put out an article, was it in The Stranger, about housing, that some of the people in West Map in some of the mutual aid groups that I work with were not thrilled with. I've heard both sides from that, and but I can't fault the work that's happening there.
I think that's the point, right? Like, the work is so solid, like this, like even the opinion isn't really like, right? Like it's kept to this opinion place. And I really respect that, because the work has been different from that, right? Like you can be mad at the article, and it wasn't about housing, it's about homelessness, which is worse. Right. I don't know. That article pisses me off.
Yeah, I had issue with the article. I mean, like I in my head want to read it again before I interview her, but I'm also not trying to be confrontational. It felt like blaming takes. It's been a while since I've read it now, but it had some blaming takes.
Did you see the follow-up in Real Change last week or the week
I
before? I think maybe.
I have not seen that. I should
It
read it.
was, I want to say his name is David Stows. I hope I'm not fucking that up. I believe this person's a contributor to Pin and I, which is a comic that's often in Real Change. I thought it was like a fantastic take. I think it addressed like 85% of my issues with Katie's article. So I think it's definitely worth reading. And you should definitely reread it before you interview her, because I think there's a respectful way to do it, but I think this idea that she welcomed debate with that. That's what I'll say is positively. I've talked to everybody. As soon as that came out, people were bringing it up at all kinds of meetings, right? So I will say this to me is a good example of how we can practice having those kinds of debates without people accusing the left of eating each other. I literally never, ever hear anybody talk about the right eating each other. And it's because that dynamic doesn't exist when you're fighting fascism and the right is like corporatocracy, right? Like, how could they eat each other when they're billionaires working on the same agenda, right? To some degree. And so I think that, like, definitely read it. I think for me, the hardest part that's missing that I find so frustrating, especially as someone who's such a huge fan of back in the day when Katie used to write for Crosscut, always had amazing, even though they're opinion pieces, they were written like articles, right? She's a great writer. The power analysis, especially, right? Like, that's what I found to be missing. It's this idea that leftists are saying this and leftists are saying that. It's like, what are our avenues to even have a message? Leftists in Seattle, the left doesn't have a platform. It is via centrist candidates. It's through unions, which are overwhelmingly conservative. Unfortunately, that's just how unions go, right? MLK Labor literally had the police as part of it. It's through rare left-leaning media like Real Change, South Seattle Emerald, or The Stranger. The Stranger's been bought out and totally changed. South Seattle Emerald and Real Change struggle to survive because of the model that they work on, right? So to me, it's just like, people talk about how the left treats each other, and there's literally never a power analysis about the actual real entities and forces that suppress our messaging, that suppress our work. I mean, even running for office is inherently a burden, right? To do that, I was doing that when I was working, right? I had to put down $3,000 cash, right? Whereas Kathy Moore could just put her retirement money forward, or right, and then get that money back, right? So I think that, like, that's the hardest part about that article, is if we're going to talk about the issues with the left, I think we should, one, disaggregate who that is. Who are we actually talking about? Because I think there is a group on the left who is not saying these things, and maybe people in the centrist who are. But also, like, where is power being held, and where is the conversation about who is able to actually influence what people think? Because I'm sorry, but we just don't have that power. We don't have the bully pulpit we used to have with maybe Shama Sawant. Maybe you could say back in the day, the left could say these things and that, that were right or wrong. But right now we don't really have that platform. So I'm wondering, how we're even sharing our messaging when we have like very few outlets for that.
Yeah, processing, not frozen.
Exactly, no worries.
We don't have the power. We don't have the platform. I have questions about Shama and why she left, what she's doing now, how we are going to move forward on the city council, whether Alexis, who I've had on the show a couple of times, is going to be able to assume that mantle and be a leftist bulwark on the city council. How we get someone else.
And respectfully, she didn't run as that, right? She did not run as like our great white hope. I don't know what it should be called, but like, and that's the scary part. People aren't even running as radical anymore.
Right.
That's where we are. People are running as hardcore progressives, liberals. Like, hard to say where she's staking that place out. I feel like her website was very, I'm not going to comment on the police, which everybody loves to do. And so it's just like the people running for mayor now, my concerns about how Katie runs. I think people on the left are so scared to run as their Shama Sawant, which many criticisms of Shama Sawant, right? She, like most politicians, doesn't give a shit about sweeps, doesn't talk about them, doesn't care about people living outside. that's less personal. That's just the human condition in the United States at this point. But that's my biggest critique of her. I just think it's very interesting that no one is wanting to stake out that space because, you know, they saw it as pointless to be that bulwark, but the messaging that she was able to do was really important, right? And that's what I was talking about with my campaign, right? When you run for office, when you're in office, for a brief moment, you have everybody's attention, whether they disagree with you, right? Like you can be interviewed by Cairo, right? Like you have people's attention. So what you say matters. When you do get into office, you can have your critique of the entire system. That's what I love about Shama, right? She was going to be the one vote against 8 people and literally lose every vote, but she had an analysis she wanted to share. And she had the platform and people wrote articles about it and people followed her, right? Like that, I think is what we're going to miss because anybody who runs for office, they are not going to run as Shama Sawant because, you know, in politics, it's seen as you're a winner or a loser and being 1 versus 8 is always going to seem like a loser idea. People are going to start wanting to compromise. And so, you know, I know a lot of people have been excited about this year's campaigns and everybody's excited about Rory O'Sullivan, but I'm like, I think when we talk about like how liberalism reacts to fascism, it's when it gets the most disappointing, when the cards are really on the table and you're being pushed to make that hard decision. Are you going to run as a radical in these wild times? And I think that people overwhelmingly choose not to. They choose to back down. They choose to be reasonable because we get told that that's how you win. And that's how you get people excited is by being the most milquetoast you possibly can be.
And I'm not convinced, frankly. I feel like there is a hunger for radical, real change that supports everyday people over fucking corporate profits. And I don't know why everyone thinks that compromising. I was having this conversation with my son about why liberalism is a bankrupt philosophy, sort of writ large. Because
Love that. Just a casual Sunday conversation.
Well, you know, because and you know he's in high school, and so he's doing some history. And I'm like, you know, liberalism, classical liberalism, is economic liberalism and liberal social policies, but economic liberalism is laissez-faire capitalism, and it is when you, and those two things are incompatible. Like if you say, oh, we want these liberal social policies and we want fucking the corporations to make money and do whatever the fuck they want, like sooner or later those things are going to come in conflict. And if neoliberalism has shown us anything, it's when those things come in conflict, you always support the fucking profit over the people. And that is why liberalism is fucking doomed to fail. I mean, as a political philosophy, because it will always end up being conservative, no matter what they fucking say. Okay, I want to talk about, and this is a thing I just don't. I know you're organizing outside of this framework, I've heard you say recently that you want to organize outside this framework as much as you can now, and I don't know what's behind it, but I want to talk about Stop the Sweeps, and I want to talk about, because I like Stop the Sweeps is not an organization, really, right? Is it? I don't. Talk to me about Stop the Sweep sort of writ large. It seems to me, I know when I attended a sweep support meeting that I think Caitlin was putting on, there was some talk about like anyone can be Stop the Sweeps. Like West Map does sweep support, and maybe they're sort of Stop the Sweeps. But what, as you define it, what is Stop the Sweeps? Let's start there.
For me, Stop the Sweeps is a social movement. I think to some degree, you know, Caitlin says it's anybody because it's like, are you in the Stop the Sweeps chat with 700 people? You're Stop the Sweeps, right? I think some people get more identified with it because we have some infrastructure, right? Like some outward facing infrastructure, like tables, and we've paid for shirts and we run social media, right? So that's what makes it feel like it's more of a group, but it is very much an autonomous collective of just like random folks. I appreciate you phrasing in that way as operating outside, you know, organizing outside of that framework of Stop the Sweeps. I do see this, like, you know, Stop the Sweeps kind of whole thing is showing up for sweeps for people in the moment, right? To be frank. And I found that I hit a wall very quickly with what I was able to do showing up to sweeps every day. And I think a lot of people hit that wall very quickly because it is demoralizing, traumatic. it feels pointless to some degree. I believe in I understand the reasons other people believe in this. But for me, to achieve that that goal of stop the sweeps, I wanted to take a step back and start building community. That's where my shift has been, right? Like that's why community hours, we're trying to like make it more permanent, make it owned by other people, support other people and being able to manage it without us. Community hours is getting to a place of being very independent, right? Ballard I've been doing for about 5 years, very much independent. I think our whole year's worth of food is planned out. Everybody knows everything. Everybody has access to the storage. It's great. Community hours, we're trying to get to that place too. And so when for the idea of this movement to stop sweeps, I think that I came into this that I could do it myself, that I could get enough house people who gave a shit and we could do that. But I recognize after going to sweeps and doing distro for so long is that it's never going to work if you're acting as someone's protector. It has to be that you are deeply in community with people. People trust you to literally defend the potential for them to go to jail, to defend their physical bodies, to defend their home. But that is not an easy ask, and that doesn't often happen, right? Because people just don't know you. So Caitlin and I have kind of pivoted to trying to build up that community, trying to teach others how to build up those communities. So when that ask comes, when we're prepared, so we're actually prepared to be there to support people to stop a sweep in the way that we did when we first met, right? That's where I met Caitlin, was on 4th Avenue, stopping a sweep for 2.5 weeks by showing up every day at 6 a.m. and just making sure the cops didn't show, right? And so, yeah, I think that the Stop the Sweeps group, it could be anybody, it could be a lot of people. I've identified as being an organizer with them. But I think that framework is a little bit limiting for me for what I'm hoping to do in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know, West Map, we do a fair bit. Not me, because I don't go to sweeps. I am really easy to incite, and and I like getting angry at, insulting, or wanting to fight with fucking cops is not going to help anyone. Like it's not gonna. And I appreciate the people who have what it takes. And at West Map, we have mostly vehicle residents. So our sweep support is like trying to get their RV moved, trying to get their truck moved out of the way. Right. And I appreciate the people who can do that, but I can see how demoralizing that can be. And one of the things that I'm so impressed with you and Caitlin in community hours is how you're out building community, how you're out talking with our neighbors, how, as people are working the tables, y'all will just go and talk with the people who are living rough. And I've long said that, organizing is the process of building the relationships we need to make change. And building those relationships, for me, it feels like work. I'm maybe a little bit neurodivergent, and I have to be prepped. I have to be, before I have an organizing conversation, I have to sort of be prepared. And seeing those of you who seem to just effortlessly go out and talk with people and build those relationships has always been so impressive to me. We have a couple people like that in West Map as well, who are they just are. It's not a skill or talent I have. It's something I work at. But super appreciate the way you do that. I was tabling at South Seattle College last week, and Doug was the table next to me with
Doug.
And I had the little Stop the Sweeps banner on the thing, and I appreciate the kit making and I don't even know what I want to say about that. What's next? You said you want to make, because I don't know the Ballard. I've never done that Ballard stuff with you. I live south and west. Ballard is a neighborhood that's so far away from me that I just don't usually go there. But I have found I still do community hours more than I do distro with my local group here. And
Because we're fun.
it is fun. And often, I have at times, stepped away because I don't feel as needed there. And that's good, right? Like it should be self-sustaining. There should be enough people. I've been so impressed by how many. It felt to me like these last couple of months, like every goddamn week there's a whole bunch of new people showing up, and like it's been an interesting transition, seeing a whole lot of people. And there's a lot of people who I remember being there from a year or so ago that I don't see much anymore. Can you talk to me about, and we've been going well over an hour now, but before we wrap, can you talk to me about that process of the people who flow in and out of these activist collectives, and how you see it becoming, like you said, the Ballard is pretty self-sustaining now, and how you see that transition coming with community hours?
So this is the part where I wish that people could see the difference between all of these things before I met Caitlin, right? Like, sorry to be like my girlfriend, but like she is the reason that we are the way we are. The kit making parties was her identifying a need and the fact that people wanted something to do. She organized that and got Doug to do it, and now Doug does it, and it's a huge resource for the community, right? Doing the sweeps training, that was something she identified as needing, and being able to talk to people about sweeps and funneling people into things like kit making and to community hours, that was something that she led, right? Talking to people, also not my strong suit. I'm not gonna say I'm a bitch, right? Because I think that can be put onto me. I'm really goal oriented, and Caitlin likes that, and that's helpful for the group. And I'm very efficient. I put my car away in the same way every time. I like a setup in a certain way, so I'm very organized. But like Caitlin is really the heart and the reason why community hours has grown, right? Like she's often the first people come into contact with, meeting them off of Instagram or something. That's often where we found people. And she's just like has a way with making people feel really welcome, right? In a way that I know I couldn't have, right? Even Ballard changed differently because of the way that she's, the energy that she's brought to that space. And I think that part of that comes down to having a deep care for people and to putting your energy in the way that you treat people, which I think is not always people's orientation when you're just like, oh, we've got a task to do. That's just kind of the way that I've situated myself. But also, I think that there's a relational aspect, right? She talks about this all the time, that like, the reason we're wanting to move away from social media, it's like we're not finding people from social media anymore, right? When she goes to this training, she talks about you need to be bringing your friends. This isn't about strangers coming together. This is about the people in your life, getting them to care enough to come down, right? And that's what's happening. Julia and Ula and all these other people are bringing their friends, and then their friends come consistently, right? And then maybe even this person stops coming, but the friend still does. And I think keeping it relational and making it based off of people's like groups. And sometimes she speaks at UW, and she's gotten people from University of Washington. Lots of young people want to come through there. I think that like that's also really important, is like making it relational, making it a part of your life. Like, I don't like to sound like a martyr, but like, this is what I do all day. Just this week, I had several meetings that were just related to different organizing projects, a media project, how's our neighbors work, things like that, where it's just like, when this is just part of the life that you're building for yourself, you should be able to bring the people into it, right? And so I think that's like what has grown the most, is like her emphasis on getting people to bring their friends and people they care about. That was never something that I worried about, right? My position is, if no one shows up, I'll just do it. Right? When I did Ballard, I would do Ballard by myself. We used to do propane. I would show up at noon to do propane, 30 tanks, then I would cook for the 3:00 feed, right? And it was just like, I guess we'll just be doing that. Whereas like Caitlin's always like asking her friends, going onto her Instagram, personally asking people, come to this thing, do this thing for me. And she models that for other people. And so they do it as well. And so I think that has like fundamentally changed who we've been able to bring in and just the sustainability of it.
That's great. That is a great framing and a great context, that it is sort of relational organizing, and who do you know, and who can you talk to, and how can you get your friends and the people in your networks and in your lives to step up and do the work.
That's where we're getting all the clothes from, right? Like, she's just, all of her friends have these nice clothes, and she's telling them, hey, my mom has a whole bag from her friends out in this community. Can you come pick it up? Like, a lot of this has been about, it's who you know, really. People always want to start with strangers. We got to start making the people in our lives engage in the work that we do.
Right. Right. Because that is what we're trying to do, is build community. Right.
Mhm.
That's so how does community hours become, like you mentioned the Ballard, they've got a storage unit, you've got it's sort of a self-sustaining thing at this point. How do we get to that point? Is it
Well, we
just
also have a storage unit for downtown if you need it. But I think we are getting to that point. I think part of it is like the structure. We've implemented some of those like mostly Caitlin, but Noel and I helped contribute to that document that we shared in the
Mhm.
chat recently that kind of goes over the etiquette. I think training people, I've noticed I don't do hot drinks anymore. Right? Giving people leadership. There's a few different people who are used to doing it. I just think people own so much of certain work that it's really hard to let go, and then it becomes really unsustainable, right? We've seen this grow because as soon as we've started to just allow other people to do different things, right? Having some people help us with the news briefs, right? That was another thing that Caitlin started that I started to help do consistently. She was like, people outside need to know what the news is, what's going on in the news that's related after the soda and soap zone laws passed, right? That's how it came about. She wanted people to know about that. And so we started making the news briefs. But then that became a burden on us. We were having to look for all these articles. So then we kind of outsourced it to a different group where, someone else who has like a graphic design degree rearranges it. So I don't have to do it on Canva and blow my mind, right? So I think part of making it sustainable is getting other people to do your work, right? Like that was something that Ballard came about pretty easily because our storage unit's right there. Unfortunately, there's not one near community hours that we could use. But yeah, part of it is handing over some of those responsibilities, putting in writing what we need to do, having the sign up sheet, and getting people, like even Noel starting to take up asking people on Thursdays. We didn't ask him to do that. That was something we always had to do. Now someone always asks in Ballard and in community hours on Thursdays who's cooking, kind of doing that. I think for a long time, part of like the work I thought was like doing the thing, but what Caitlin and I have learned as our strong suit is like helping other people learn to do the thing, right? Like really love sharing our knowledge and educating people and telling people why we do what we do so that you can have some goals, some reasons, some strategy, some tactic around what you're doing, right? And I feel like that's been pretty successful. People have kind of risen up and stepped up, especially with GB not being able to do food for a bit. Yeah, it's been great. I feel like it's in this last year or so has become incredibly strong.
It has. I don't know what they're using on Signal these days. Cheech, maybe. They were the first person I saw with a rack doing clothing, and so I grabbed myself a rack, and then when I had the ability or the opportunity to grab a bunch of clothes, I did. You came out and helped me sort a bunch of it, and I spent time
Yeah.
right going through and distributing those. And I've tried to step up and do some of the harm reduction distribution, just because I like to have a thing to do. Like it really makes
Mhm.
me feel better when I've got a thing to do when I show up. And I don't want it to be dependent on me. I've been thrilled that clothing has seemed to become a regular part of
Yeah.
community hours, right? Um, and I don't have to be there every week. I just can't commit to being there absolutely every week. And so I'm glad that it's still happening. Um, I think I've got 3 of those goddamn clothing racks in my garage now. Okay, one just lives in my car now, and I think I got 2 others. 2 others in
It
my
really
garage.
is like the most awkwardly sized thing, and it doesn't go down at all. I mean, honestly, clothing was something I resisted. I was just talking to Caitlin yesterday about how, being able to let go of your vision for an organization is fine. And really, when you trust people to take care of things yourself, I did not want to do clothes because I was like, people in the beginning, people would leave extra shit when we didn't have this huge line. There'd be all these leftovers for food that people just dropped off for clothes. We have to put it in our car. We have to take it to storage. We have to organize it, get it out somewhere. It drove me insane. But like
Mhm.
allowing other people to like create the infrastructure, putting up a boundary, being like, if you bring something, I'm not taking it, right? You got to get it out. Allowed us to have this great resource. Now people love the clothes. And that was something I was very much against. And something that if you said we had to bring it every week, I would not bring. But because other people can do it, you know, God bless their heart. And
Right.
so I'm just like, I'm very happy to have been wrong about that. Even the expansion of what we do. I was like, we're just going to do food and hot drinks. It has turned into a whole thing, but it's manageable. Other people are taking it on. It's not my business all the time. And so I'm just there as a support. And I think one of the things, the important part of letting go is that you can also talk to people more, right? You can't
Right.
talk to people when you're just saying hot chocolate and coffee or hot chocolate and cocoa, which I love to say, and people are very confused. It's like as soon as I stopped doing that, then I got to have more conversations with people. Then I
Right.
got to start learning a few more names and to do some kind of conflict resolution and to just kind of watch out for the area to see if I can help de-escalate any situations, right? So I think that's also the important part is like once you're not in the hustle and bustle and you're comfortable, you can start having conversations with people getting food.
Yes. And I mean, I still, it's more comfortable for me to just do a thing.
Exactly. JB's keeping close. No. That's totally fair, right? Like people come there to help and people come there to volunteer. My perspective is I don't like doing stuff, right? As much as people like are, oh, Ty, you're doing everything. I'm at a place where I'm delegating. If you see me associated with something, just know that I had a white person do it for me.
Well, and it's great that we are at a place where these things are becoming sort of self-sustaining and that they are able to and I so appreciated the boundaries that you put up about the clothes because that was one of my frustrations when I started bringing clothes. It's like, oh, now people are just showing up and dropping a box or a few big bags of shit, and now it's on me to hang this stuff and then take what's left home with me. And
Oh no,
it's
JB,
like,
I wish you told me you were doing that before. Immediately like, I'm not taking this. It's like the bread. Did you see the comment about the bread?
yeah,
No bread. Nobody eats that damn bread. We're not taking the bread, you guys. And so, it's okay to have that boundary.
all right, so we've been going. We got about an hour and a half, so I'm going to wrap this up. What's next for you, Ty? What would you like if you could pimp a thing right now? What would it be? What do you?
You know what's next for me? Actually, Hauser Neighbors is doing another delegation and they want to go to Taiwan. I want to go to Taiwan.
Whoa.
But what's next for me in Seattle is the continuation of some of these projects, right? Like now that I'm not having to be the center, I'm meeting with a friend outside to do, I don't know if you're familiar with Poor Magazine, but they have a radio show and they want us to have like they're based in Oakland and they want to have like a PNW kind of branch where people outside are being able to make their own radio shows. So I'm meeting with a friend weekly to help her start that. Actually, I might ask for you some tips. It's very rough, so your tips might be too advanced. We're just going to be recording on phones in the beginning, but the idea is that folks want to tell their story, folks want to sing, they want to have little segments, and I kind of want to facilitate that and see how that goes. Homefulness is something that I talk about not so much at in community hours. It's something that I'm just now getting comfortable talking about, but it's also a project of Poor Magazine. It's a homeless people's solution to homelessness, right? Is this idea of unselling Mama Earth, as Tiny would say, and getting a piece of land and being able to be unswept there, right? As many ways that I think we should be resisting sweeps, at the end of the day, they will always be able to remove you from public land under the current regime that we have, right? The only way you can not be removed is to have your own land. So that's another project that we're trying to get off the ground, is being able to buy a piece of land in Seattle where folks who live outside can start actually developing the skills, the talents, the voice that they want to. So that's like my long-term goal, right? That took Poor Magazine down in Oakland like 11 years to get off the ground, right? So this is something that might take us, hopefully with their guidance, half the time, but that's what I'm trying to put my energy and my work into, is building strong communities through things like downtown community hours, and helping support folks living outside and like pursuing some of the projects that they have in mind, right? I'm kind of in the delegating and connecting stage, making people's other projects happen, because it's shown that I can kind of succeed in my own. And so I'm like, how can I support other people, right? People need guidance. People don't inherently know how to stay organized or do logistics or run their own distro. Caitlin and I think are scheduled to talk to a class at Puget Sound Community School. They're going to have a mutual aid class, and I think we're going to do a panel for them, and then also help support them developing as like young people their own kind of mutual aid paradigm, right? So infecting the youth, radicalizing young brains, as we all should be.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think it's a great place to sort of wrap up. I really appreciate you being here. I encourage people to get involved with your community, get involved in, like, I think if you've shown us anything, it's that by just fucking stepping up and doing the thing and then building the community around it, how much of a change it can make. Because I've just been I feel like your work has been transformative for so many people. I certainly have appreciated having a connection with you and being able to be a small part of the work that you're doing. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for the work you do. Everyone out there, like, this is how we make change. You find a need and then you step up and you build the community to help meet that need. This is how we make change. This is how we, as the show says, rise up. We need to just do the work and find ways to make our community stronger. Thank you, Ty, and Adam. Thank you, everyone out there listening. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth.